Hello, everyone. I'm just going to get this started and get this one shared out real quick while we're waiting on Jason to come up. I hope you are all having an amazing time and enjoying Parapalooza 2021. And there is our guest right now. Hello.
Howdy.
How are you?
So far, so good. You having fun yet?
I am having a blast. I may be losing my voice before the end of this. This is, I think, number, what? 12 altogether. So
busy today, huh?
5 today. This is number 5 today. So I'm making sure that this is shared out good. So I want to give people a chance to come in here real quick before
no problem
we start going on. How have you been?
Can't complain. Busy, but I cannot complain.
That's good. Is it everything calming down in y'all's area?
Sort of. Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Like it is.
Yeah, like the COVID stuff and things like that. Yeah, it's kind of calmed down, but I never get a chance to. I never leave this office, and again, my office is a closet. Like I work from home now, and I have for a while, and then all of the broadcasting stuff I do is done here. So like I never leave. If it wasn't for the fact that I walk the dog and I have to use the restroom, I'd never leave this room.
Feels like you're always at work.
Yeah, pretty much. So, but I guess there are worse problems to have. So
very true.
KJ Paranormal Down Under, howdy.
Hello, KJ.
Yeah, I can't really complain. I've got this. Here's the thing. I'm just trying to find time to learn. I got this new drawing tablet, and I'd like to start working more digitally. So I got a new program that's supposed to be super awesome, and it is super awesome. I'm trying to figure out I'm trying to find time to learn how to use it because there's so many things that it does. Right. So I'm trying to learn that to work on some new projects. Once I'm gonna try and promote the new book for like another 2-3 months, and then I'd like to do some other projects using and move on. So I'm trying to learn that and move fully into digital. So
that'll be interesting. I can't wait to see that. Hello, Dustin. Hello, Cody. If everyone will, please smash that like, share this out. I know everybody was on last stream fixing to go get them some drinks and something to eat and stuff real quick. It's been a day, and we've had a lot of people coming over from each one. So we'll have more coming in here. And if you're watching this on the replay, Jason's book link to his books on Amazon is down in the description. Also, the show that he co-hosts with Tex, Trinity Paracryptic Research, that link is down in the description as well. So make sure you go check out those. You also have one other show you do, right?
Yeah. So I've got a Bible study that I do every Thursday and Sunday, although this Sunday I'm actually out of town, so I won't be doing it. But it's called Not Another Bible Study. And basically it's a Bible study. But we do talk about things. Yeah. It's I figured not your grandfather's Bible study seemed a little long in the tooth.
Right.
But the idea is it's a Bible study that does not shy away from hard topics. It doesn't shy away from things like the Nephilim, the supernatural, archaeology, having more in-depth discussions. You don't necessarily have to agree. We actually do take questions and make those discussions, right? I think a great example is that, I would say chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis, right, they are stories, right? They're meant to make theological points, but they fit together nicely. Where chapter 2 is simply an exploded version of what happened in chapter 1, because chapter 1 has a specific goal, and then it's moving on and says, well, now here's this other story, so we can focus on that. There is another viewpoint that says, no, it's actually a sequel to that first chapter. They are building on top of each other, and that Adam isn't actually the first human, that he's simply pulled out of humanity to become humanity's first priest. So we had that conversation, and where I would say I don't agree with it. Let me phrase it. I don't read it that way. I will admit it doesn't do violence to the text, right? So so the point being, we try to really run down all the different interpretations, all the different, sort of understandings, and weigh them and measure them. Say, hey, does this have validity? Does it not? And it's not whether or not I agree or prefer something. It's this is where something works. This is where something doesn't, and we're more than happy to talk about things that I don't get. Right? Like I've happily talked about things that I have questions about, and so that we can work on them together. So, like I said, it's not another Bible study.
That is awesome, and I'm definitely going to check that out. It seems and I don't understand why I haven't already checked it out.
I don't know. I feel you hurt my heart right now with that.
I know, maybe I missed that conversation, or
many times I have cried in my sock drawer, like, why is it here? But you move on.
I bet you did. Yes. So we'll definitely get that link and put it down in the description as well. Now, are you still doing the show with Daniela?
Yeah, whenever I can, which is most Sundays. And again, this Sunday I'm going to be out of town. So, but yeah, I'm on with Daniela on Sunday night. Anything goes. We try to just talk about anything, whatever. Like last week was crime and punishment. We've talked about just weird food things. And of course, Bigfoot pops up every once in a while, but
So YouTube is definitely keeping you busy.
It is. At some point, I'm probably going to need to make a decision somewhere along the line. But you know what? If I'm not leaving this particular office anyway, I mean, why not? Exactly. So I'm already here.
So now, is writing something that you've always done? Was that like I know it's not your career, right?
No.
So is it something that you want to make a career?
It's always sort of been there. I'm more of a fiction fan, but it does turn out that I have a little way of at least from what people tell me, I think it's crap, but people like the sort of the way I explain things, right? The way that I can take complicated concepts and sort of explain it in a way that makes sense. So this sort of, you can call it nonfiction. In fact, that's one of the questions my wife's like, well, is your stuff nonfiction or what is it? I don't know. It's the world of cryptozoology, the world of the paranormal is complicated, and a lot of people kind of so my writing is very much trying to make it entertaining, but also try and make it put into bite-sized pieces so people can kind of slowly get build up that broader idea of what we're really talking about. Like, for example, in the book, one of the things that I really discovered while doing the research for it was I had never really understood, and really no one had talked about it, the interplay of lore, urban legend, and actual cryptids, contact with cryptids, and how that can really shape and affect some of the other lore around it. And so one of the big recurring themes of the book is how often one event, right, one very popular event, reshapes the narrative for so much of what happens all over the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, which is the Fort Worth, the Lake Worth Monster event, right? The Lake Worth Goat Man that happens in the 60s. That event is so well documented that it reshapes the paranormal and cryptozoological sort of viewpoint of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and alters a lot of our lore. And we can actually sort of see it. I was very lucky to run across people who had documented some things on like the local city level, and you can actually sort of see how certain things evolve. And an example of this is the infamous Old Alton Bridge, which you've been to, we've all been to. Weird place, right? But it's called the Denton Goat Man, right? And everyone sort of associates it with it, but the story you've heard actually depends on when you lived, because there are numerous stories, and there's a clear evolution of it that goes back to stories from centuries before in other locations. It's just a version of the Hangman's Bridge myth, right? Which you can trace to places, to all over the country. But once you have in the 60s, you have the Goat Man event. Jim Mars is the one who sort of dubs what most people believe to be a Sasquatch encounter in Fort Worth. They name him the Goat Man, and actually, I was lucky to run across some people who had, when I was going back through what Jim Mars had written, there was some themes in there. I was like, I wonder if this is mange. And so I called up a friend of mine who does a lot of work rescuing animals, particularly dogs. And I asked, and he's basically an expert on mange. I'm like, hey, I've never seen mange that bad. But if there was an animal that had, a bad case of mange, could it be seen as scales or even like burns? And he goes, oh, absolutely. He goes, I've heard that all the time. He's like, I've got people coming in who thinks dogs have been burned by somebody or survived a fire when it's just mange, which matches up very nicely with what we actually see in those Jim Mars articles, right? Is that the creature, the reason they thought it had, people discuss scales or burns, is because it had mange, which again makes you think this was a Bigfoot that they were talking about. But the name Goat Man re-alters everything so that now every supernatural event that people see in and around, like, say, Old Alton Bridge, becomes Goat Man.
Right.
But more importantly, I do think there were Sasquatch, and we see this with Cedar Hill. Cedar Hill actually has a very detailed account of that fall. Like, just a few months later, there are several encounters with a Bigfoot in and around Cedar Hill, which I've still got accounts going back only 5 years coming out of the exact same area, right? And the thing is, so now it becomes the Goat Man. And I think that's what happened. All of these areas, there was an encounter with a Sasquatch. So people said, okay, Sasquatch, that's actually goat. So everyone's calling it now the Goat Man, where, like, say 100 years ago, they were calling it the monster, the thing that, that prowls the creeks. It now became Goat Man. And so the problem is now we have a name, and then every paranormal event that's sort of in the area is attributed to that Goat Man. Make sense? And so a lot of this lore is changed and shifts because of that event. And what's weird is it's clear some are inspired by a Sasquatch encounter, right? Like Cedar Hill probably didn't, probably down in Johnson County with the Old Foamy, which is just the worst name for a cryptid ever. But then we have like White Rock Lake, where, okay, you could say maybe it was inspired by a Sasquatch, but we now actually do have paranormal creatures appearing as goat people, like satyrs. Cedar Hill has some really bizarre. There's a bizarre series of encounters that's recorded with one person who's willing to go on the record. I've got other accounts, but the problem is they didn't want to go on the record. So I used the one who would, but it was a really, really bizarre series of events. And you're like, this is the same area, but this is not a Squatch. This is not a Sasquatch, but it does have some vague similarities to an encounter that had less than a quarter mile from the Old Alton Bridge. That, again, that sure as the world ain't a Sasquatch. And it doesn't seem to be like a satyr either. So there's some really weird things that have happened in and around these areas. And the problem is, it seems like a bunch of different phenomena is all getting grouped together, and the same names are being used, and they're taking lore and Mars accounts, and that's being superimposed over it. So like when you read up on the White Rock Lake Goat Man, they'll say, oh, he throws tires and trash at people and has been known to attack picnic goers. Well, hold on. That's word for word what you get out of, Lake Worth. So that's what's happened. And the book allows that to be sort of, sorted through. And then we can kind of start seeing these other things popping up, and how there's other stories that evolve out of this as well, out of Sasquatch encounters, differing opinions on them, and so they become different characters, that kind of thing.
I always enjoy listening to you talk about that stuff because you're always So smart.
Hey, it can't be just because I'm pretty, man.
Well, I mean, there's that too.
Yeah.
Now, researching these books, it kind of explained to us how you go about researching for your books and like what, if any, experiences you had going to some of these places to research.
Okay. Well, so research is, I don't know that I have a set way of doing research. I think a lot of what I do is more academic as far as research. I like to go to the actual libraries. I try to speak to historical societies, and actually interview people. A lot of what I've done though is I just got tired of being embarrassed asking people questions, and I just ask random people that I've met, "Hey," and I would start with, "I'm a biblical paranormal researcher. I'm working on a book. Have you seen anything weird?" And people may say, "Well, what do you mean by weird?" I'm like, "I don't know, Sasquatch, living pterosaur, supernatural event." Or I may say, "Hey, you know this thing has been sighted down here. Have you had any contact with anything?" I was really surprised how quickly people would be like, "Oh, you're actually researching. Well, maybe you know something about what I saw," and then they'd talk about it. And it's like you don't lead them, but you allow them to talk. And it was crazy how quick, particularly the pterosaurs, the living pterosaurs in North Texas, Southern Oklahoma, and in other places, but that's where I was focusing on, are seen all the time. There were people I had known for years who had encounters that they're like, "Oh, well, let me tell you about my encounter with this thing." And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I've known you for 20 years. How in the world did you not tell me you had an encounter with the goat man or that you saw a living pterosaur? And he's like, "Well, you don't talk about it. Like, no one talks about these things." So that was sort of that's really a big part of it. But again, it's actually going out and talking to people, going to historical societies, museums, and getting a lot of times there are just people they've recorded the stories, they put it down on paper, and then no one ever reads it. No one ever actually investigates it. No one actually looks into it. So you go back, you find the old articles, you find these historical societies, and you go through that. And then it becomes, like I said, I like to try and find larger themes. So things like the Lechusa, there's a story of a Lechusa that attacked a young woman in Oak Cliff. And there were parts of it that made me go, this sounds really familiar. So you go back and you start looking at inscriptions from Samaria, and you read up on lore, your Greek mythology. And again, I will admit I have a misspent youth of trying to get to become an archaeologist. So a lot of this stuff is sort of in the back of my head. But then you go back and you look at research into Inanna and the Shayadim, and you just do this. And then you got to be afraid not to explore the footnotes, right? Someone makes a comment, and really some of the best things I found were in footnotes, where you're like, "Hey, okay, there's this footnote on this one thing. Let me go look at that." And you find this other guy who's done all this research on something else entirely. And you're like, "Okay." And then you find his footnotes, and so it's just more going into the rabbit holes of research and seeing what actual academics have done, to just try and find that bigger picture, right? Because there's stuff that none of us are going to have time to research ourselves. Like I'm never going to get a chance to learn Akkadian and fly over to the Middle East and try and decipher these different tablets, but I don't have to because somebody already has. In fact, a lot of people have. And a lot of people have even looked and said, "Hey, there's this thing called a Leshy, and it seems to be this Indo-European myth, and it has these, and here are these, it's described this way, and here are the things that seems to connect to the Shadim of Hebrew and the Greek and Roman satyrs." And it's like they've already done the work. And so you put that together and you're like, okay, well, does this connect to the stuff that we're seeing here? Answer, yeah, it does. So it begs a lot of questions. Same thing with like the Lechusa. It's like, okay, here's the broader themes, and then here's the broader themes in current Hispanic society. Well, that's great, but that's still almost identical to what we see in the Greek mythology with the Harpies. And then you can go even further back with things like Lilith and Inanna. Like you can see these repetitions of forms and thought. So for me, it begins with talking to people, talking with local historical societies, museums, libraries, things like that. And then it gets into the infinite black hole that is academic research, of going into and finding uh, footnotes from other people, right? And being willing to say, okay, let me go see what I can find, and let me go see what things match up, and let me go see where I'm seeing these patterns and repetitions. As far as encounters, I'll be honest, I usually go extremely prayed up to these places, so I almost never have like any paranormal encounters. The one encounter that I've had that, well, okay, I technically saw a UFO, but that was years ago. Um, the encounter I had was when I was 11 or 12. I do talk about it in the book, and in many ways, it is what set me on this course. Although I wouldn't have even recognized it years ago. I know, I think we've talked about this before on the show, but not everyone has seen it. So when I was 11 or 12, I saw a living pterosaur here in North Texas. Actually, I was in the 10 Mile Creek. It flew right by me, less than 5 feet from my face. And it is, and I am not the only one who's seen these. They are apparently extremely common. In fact, after the book had been published, I really wish this other account had gotten to me from a very, I'll just say he was a very reliable source. That's all I can say. But he is known to me personally. And he's not someone who believes in any of this. Like, he was not someone who's like, he's just like, look, even when I first started coming out, he's like, dude, you don't necessarily want to come out with stuff like this. People are going to think you're crazy. Because he was like, he had the same reaction I had over 20 years ago now. I'm getting old. Oh my gosh. Hold on. Almost 30 years ago. Okay, this is getting old. I'm getting old here, and I don't like it. So it's been almost 30 years. My thought was, hey, these things don't exist here, right? And nearly everyone I talk to, the reason that they don't talk about it is they're like, these things don't exist here. They exist in the Congo. They exist in Papua New Guinea. They exist in strange and far off locations, right? So it can't be here. Not in Dallas, Texas. Not in South Dallas. Not in all these, not with all these houses and things. And so that also led me down this other thing. But again, the gentleman who told me, like, right after the book had come out, he came to me and he's like, okay, I need you to tell me, like, it came in sections. He's like, I need you to tell me if anyone has reported seeing anything weird on this date in the sky. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, I can't tell you, just tell me. Okay. Finally, I get him to break down. He's like, okay, I saw this. And it was less than a mile and a half from my sighting when, from back in 1992. And it wasn't a living pterosaur, but it literally flew right over him. So for his perspective, he's looking up at it, whereas I was looking to the side. So it looked more like a pterosaur to me. For him, it almost looked human. And that's the thing, is if you actually look at a pterosaur form, like, they would actually stand up, like, they look very human-esque. That's why I kind of think a lot of these flying, not all of them, but a lot of these flying humanoids are actually pterosaurs. They're just seen from below, because they seemingly, and this is consistent on all these people that I have interviewed and that other people have interviewed. They do this thing where they do this S curve with their neck, like, how a crane, when they fly, they'll sometimes do it out, but sometimes they'll do their neck as this weird S curve, and so it actually makes them more aerodynamic when they fly. That seems to be how these pterosaurs are flying, and they're not massive. I mean, they're big; they're 8 to 10 feet in wingspan, but they're not. They're not 20, 30 feet across, right? They're small enough to not necessarily be observed. And really what I think is happening with a lot of these is that they look so much like cranes, and they're mostly nocturnal. So when they are seen during the day, right, they look enough like a crane that most people don't ever stop to look close enough. Every story, mine included, because I thought it was the biggest blue heron I'd ever seen in my life. Every person I've spoken to directly, and every account I've heard from other researchers, said this line: I thought it was a pelican. I thought it was a crane. I thought it was an owl because it was at night. And then I got a closer look. Everyone to the person says that. And and because they're 8 to 10 feet, the wingspans are 8 to 10 feet, they're big, but they're not so much larger from, like, say, a blue heron or a pelican, that you couldn't mistake one for the other. You have to look really close to be like, wait a minute, that's not quite right. And that's when you realize there's no feathers. That's not the legs aren't sticking out from behind it. It's a tail with a flange on the end. And you have to really look. And they seem to be nocturnal anyway, so they're not really seeing stuff for the early morning. And this gets into another point that I talked about in the book, what I call the green wall. Our entire world, like I said, we tend to think like there's no way these things could be here, because we keep saying, well, wouldn't we see them all the time? There's so many people, 7 million people in the North Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth metroplex, right? So how could these things stay hidden? Well, we've actually made it kind of easy for them. My encounter was in the creek. There's a woman encounter. She was driving on 35 morning, and it flew into the same creek I saw it. The guy who's unfortunately I couldn't get his account into the book because it already come out by that point. His was from like a mile and a half the way the crow flies from that particular creek. Well, the thing about these creeks, and really any, it doesn't even have to be a creek; it can be like a gully. Here in North Texas, what we do is we mow basically right up to that tree line. That's where all the water is. So that's where you have this thick tree and foliage and brush. You could march anything into those creeks. No one would see it. You can, we any place where we have massive flooding, because we do get really crazy flooding in the springs here in North Texas, right? So what we've kind of done is we've engineered our sorry, I just saw that I'm seeing a couple questions here. I do want to come and answer. I want to answer them. Then I saw Entity Paranormal Investigators comment, so I'd like to hear more about that. But where this flooding is, right? We have created these connected green spaces, because it's like, well, there's flooding here all the time. Why build houses? So we block them off and we build them up so that we sort of have this area of these natural, untouched green areas, these green spaces that are just as wild as anything else. And what we tend to do is we mow, right? We mow right up to that tree line. And then, so what you have is the trees are blocking the light inside. So it's actually very easy to move around. But right there at that tree line, you have these tall brushes, these tall grasses that can get 6 feet high. You can't see into them anywhere. And unless you have a bridge crossing that creek or that green space, you can't see into it. So what you've got is this large, I mean, very, very large, connected series of green spaces that have these, what I call the green wall, protecting them. We've actually made it easier for cryptids to exist in the modern world than it was even 100 years ago or 50 years ago. Like, one of the reasons people even saw and had this contact with the Sasquatch at Lake Worth was because we had, just people went out into the woods more, and there wasn't always the same level of sort of having everything pre-made up, right? It's, so everyone could kind of just go out, and it was still wild enough that these animals would feel comfortable coming in, and we could go to them, and we had these contacts. Now we've really divided ourselves between the world of the natural and the world of humanity. We live and drive and spend our entire lives on concrete islands with concrete bridges, and the wild is everywhere else. The only times we would actually ever come across these is when they stumble into our world or we stumble into theirs. But we've very much isolated ourselves. So even when we go on nature hikes, they're on predetermined trails that are marked and have nice little paved ways. So these creatures can know where to avoid humans. We are literally saying, hey, if you don't want to see a human, don't go in these places. And I don't think the pterosaurs are that smart. I just think it's a very small population. They're mostly nocturnal. And when you do see them, they tend to look like cranes. And so people just mistake them for what they are. So the question is whether or not I think that these are paranormal. I don't. Not the cranes, the pterosaurs. I believe the pterosaurs are physical creatures. I think they are remnants of the ancient world. I think they've always been here in Western, in Western Europe during the Middle Ages. They were called wyverns. In the Bible, they are called the flying fiery serpents. They've been called dragons. You name them. They've always been here. We just didn't know what to call them. And the thing is, now we call them rhamphorhactoid pterosaurs. But they've always been here. They just have very small populations, and they tend to be, reclusive. So I am looking to try and set up camera traps and really see if I can find the dens, because if there's so much consistency with them being in this area, then eventually we have to maybe just spend a little more time looking for them. But we'll find a body. We'll be able to get them on camera. I'd like to find a den. I would like to be very careful about it, though, because you've got the Van Meter visitor, which seemed to have some sort of powers, or like it talks about light in being emitted, things bursting into flames. So maybe the myth of fire-breathing dragons has some validity. We don't know, right? So I'd like to look into it. Again, I tend to think, as we talk about this on Texas Show all the time, with Bigfoot, I call it the Bigfoot phenomena, because I think what we're seeing is a bunch of different phenomena, right? Physical and paranormal phenomena are all being grouped under the name. Again, like I said, the Goatman event at Lake Worth reshaped our mythology in North Texas. I think that there are physical Bigfoots that are primates. They exhibit very typical primate behavior. Then there seem to be legitimate, maybe giants, like humanoid, not necessarily, I don't think those are Bigfoot. And there do seem to be paranormal creatures that the problem is we're calling them Bigfoot. We're calling them Sasquatch. And I don't know that they are. Now, am I saying that I don't believe that Sasquatch is paranormal? I'm saying I think that the question of this phenomena has been overly convoluted, and we need to break everything out into what people are seeing. Because there's a difference between what people say is seen, there's between what people actually see, and then what actually is there, right? That's those are things that we really need to start breaking out. So there are clearly paranormal entities that are all over North Texas. I think they're pretty much everywhere, or anyway. And it does appear that they change shape depending on their location. White Rock Lake is a great example. Several accounts. One is a crowd of people that see an actual 7-foot tall goat man, horns, hooves, straight out of every comic book for the devil you've ever seen, right? But I have several other accounts where in and around the White Rock Lake area, like about less than a mile and a half, 2 miles away, where people are encountering similarly sized creatures, again, clearly paranormal, but they don't have the horns. They're more gaunt. And it becomes very, very different. And we can either say there's multiple sets of paranormal figures running around the White Rock Lake area, or it's the same one, but taking different forms depending on where it is. It's entirely possible that our beliefs, our thoughts, our preconceived notions, our stories are actually affecting how we see these creatures. At least the paranormal ones. The physical ones are probably always going to be running around, like I said, being a Sasquatch or being a living pterosaur, or being what looks to be, giant catfish, giant alligator gar, which is just terrifying to me. So there's even an account of one that looks like it may have been some form of mosasaur. So, I mean, there's all kinds of weird stuff running around.
That's crazy. There's so much going on. And I do agree with you that it is a lot easier for them to be hidden nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So, I had a question and it just lost me. I I've been saving it too.
I'm sorry.
You're good. I should write these down. You know how I am, though. Anybody else has any questions, make sure you put them in our apps so we can see them. What was my question?
Well, while you're remembering, someone had mentioned something about seeing something flying in the middle of the road. Sirupapers@yahoo.com. SIRU papers@yahoo.com. Email me that story. I'd love to hear it. And again, where, when, that kind of thing, because I'm trying to find, I think I can find a way, because again, the living pterosaurs, I think they're nothing more exotic than they're flying reptiles. I don't think they're overly intelligent, right? So I think we got a better chance of tracking those down. The thing is, they don't have the appeal that Sasquatch does for some reason. So I think they've largely been ignored. And plus, I think also Bigfoot being, a lot of people have thought of him being, or of the Sasquatch being a relative of Gigantopithecus, which, supposedly went extinct only 13,000 years ago. So I think people see that as being a lot easier than, say, a dinosaur, which to modern scholars would say, oh, they went extinct 65 million years ago. I don't think, again, I come back to, I just don't think they went extinct that long ago. I think it's in the order of thousands of years. Jared King, I see your question. Which creature? This creature I saw, or... Because, again, there's multiple things that we discussed. So if you tell me which creature, I can more properly respond. What are your thoughts on people who have seen werewolves? Okay, so Queen Laura TV. So here's the question, right? With the whole werewolf thing. So Tex, who's been on, you had him on yesterday, didn't you, or was it today?
Yes, yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah. It's all blurring together now. I need more caffeine. He saw what he thought was a dog man. So the thing is, people are seeing dogmen. So werewolf is a very specific thing, right? It is a human who is transformed into a canine-like creature. Then there are things that people are seeing. They're calling them dogman. Are they real? I think people are absolutely seeing these things. And the big monkey wrench on a lot of this, and this is going to tie into Jared's question. The question I have to ask is it possible for people to undergo such radical transformations? And
Uh-oh. I think you froze, Jason. We'll give him just a sec to come back. Oh, Jason. This happens. He'll be right back. We'll get him back up here, guys. Make sure y'all take a sec to make sure, or to check out the links that we have below. Oh, Jason. Okay, Jared, I will. Oh, that was the door slamming outside. Sorry, guys. That scared me. Sometimes the wind catches it and slams it shut. Let's hope he's able to come back up. And guys, if you like listening to Jason, I've actually got to sit around a campfire and talk to him about this stuff. And it is awesome hearing his thoughts on it. So make sure you go and check out their channel, Trinity Paracryptic Research, where him and Tex discuss a lot of this stuff all the time. That link is in the description as well. And he has another show that he does. So yeah, Joey. They like messing with the doors too. So yeah, it definitely could have been that. They like messing with my front door though. They like to lock my door whenever I go out, even just going to my mom's. Okay, he's fixing to come back. Oh, by the Lord, Twinkie.
So promise.
He's getting on his mobile hotspot, guys, so he'll be right here. Let's see. And there he is. And you're back.
Sorry about that. We have AT&T out here where we live, and we don't have any options, and so I guess they're having problems at the moment.
I understand completely.
Luckily, my wife is really good with figuring out how to do mobile hotspots and stuff like that. I break electronics, so anyway.
Well,
so
Jared was saying that it was what you were talking about. So
yeah. So back to so the question of the werewolf. My question with all of these things where if a human is turning into something, because I have plenty of stories of people around the world from missionaries who, when they were confronting like witch doctors, shamans, things like that, they would turn into creatures, right? So the question becomes: are these people physically changing, or are what we seeing is the demon, emerging out of them, and sort of we as spiritual beings are seeing the demon in them, right? So that is sort of the bigger question with things like with werewolves specifically: is are they people who are demonically influenced, and what we're actually seeing is the demon that's sort of emerged out of them, right, and is in control, or are they purely supernatural creatures, or are, again, maybe they aren't what we consider them werewolves because they're humanoid, but are they something else? Are they physical creatures? Like one theory we're playing with right now is, are they living lemurs? There used to be giant lemurs in the world that when you look at their fossils, they would look very much like Dogman. So I think the problem is it may be all of the above, right? There may be some living thing that looks like a Dogman that's just a lemur, or maybe it is a dog, but they're physically running around, small population. But then maybe we do have humans who are engaging in the occult, and they are becoming influenced, and they are being taken on by a demonic entity that's giving them superhuman powers, like as we see in the Bible, where people who are possessed have superhuman strength. They know things they're not supposed to know, so it gives them power. But what we're actually seeing is the demon sort of emanating out of them. I don't have an answer for that. it may be that these are all of the above. Which ties into Jared's question. I think the creature I saw was a flesh and blood living pterodactyl or pterosaur. It's of the ramphactoid species. They're the ones that don't really have a crest, but and everyone that I've talked to, they thought it was the same thing, living, breathing animal, right? Just a living reptile. However, a question that I have in my head is, what if the reason we're not finding their bodies, for again, there's I'll go through. There's a good explanation as to why we're not finding the bodies, but let's put that to the side for a second. What if the reason we're not finding physical evidence for a lot of these creatures is because we are seeing something physical, right? Like I thought I was seeing the biggest blue heron in the world. Most people, again, as I said, they thought they were seeing pelicans or a heron or whatever, and then they got a better look at it. What if that better look, right, is actually some other supernatural entity messing with our perception of what we're seeing? And so this creature is only 5 feet from me, but maybe it is still a blue heron, and something's making me see it as a living pterosaur. I don't have an answer for that. Right now, I kind of have to go with Occam's razor, which is people have seen these things for thousands of years. I think like the Jersey Devil. I think that was actually a living pterosaur. We often think of it, but it doesn't have hoofs and it's a deer. And it's like, well, hold on. You got to go back in the story. How did we get that perception? And it was from a cartoonist from Philadelphia who had no contact with it. He just took what people were saying literally and created this monster out of his mind. He was not actually trying to recreate what people saw. So that became the idea of what the Jersey Devil was. If you look very carefully at it, it does sound like a living, like a ramphactoid pterosaur, like what I saw, like what dozens of people have seen in the North Texas and Southern Oklahoma area. And so I tend to think that the creature I saw, and that most of what I consider to be cryptids, are living, breathing entities. They are creatures. They live, they die, they procreate, they defecate, they eat. They're animals, right? They're just animals that seem weird to us. The paranormal stuff, though, I think the problem is often it gets tied into it because we, as humans, want to look for patterns. We're like, well, this is weird, and this is also weird. They must be the same thing, right? And I just don't think that's what it is. So, which is a really long way of saying there are paranormal creatures, but I do think the living pterosaurs are physical creatures. But like I said, we still have things like the lechusa that attacked the young woman here in Oak Cliff. It's clearly a paranormal entity, and in her account, there's plenty of places where like, okay, this is clearly a paranormal thing, but it also had physical effect. It landed and was moving from tree to tree, and the trees were bowing and shaking from contact. One of the goat men, when he's sort of away from White Rock Lake a little more, where it had been was a burn mark, and they were driving the next day down that same alleyway. They actually, when they get close to where it had been, the car acts like it hit something. Like it actually shakes and goes up and down. They thought they'd run over a kid. The husband jumped out thinking that maybe he had somehow missed a kid or a dog or something because of how violently the car reacted, but he couldn't find anything. So this is where this whole question gets really gray and very frustrating, because you'd like to find the carcass of a living pterosaur or Sasquatch or whatever, just be like, okay, good, we're done, we found them, they exist. But then at the same time, it's like, well, hold on, shouldn't something that's paranormal be paranormal and non-physical? But yet we do see them having that physical effect on our material world. So it does cause you to ask that question. Like, I don't know. Do we even know what's physical? Because the problem is being real and being physical, two different questions. So I wish I could sit here and say, yes, it was a material creature. Here's its genetic code, but I can't because we haven't found it, right? So I don't know. I'd like to think it is. It would make me feel a lot better if it was, but the world we live in seems to be really weird sometimes. So I can't say definitively.
I love when you take the long way around for everything. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time.
Exactly.
The hour goes by so quick. But guys, if you want to go and hear more from Jason, make sure you check out Trinity Paracryptic Research. Also, if you want to check out the books, the link for the Amazon is in the description. He has 2 that are paranormal based, kind of more paranormal, and then you have several other ones as well. So if y'all check them out, please go do so, but make sure you go show them some love. And I will add the other link to his other show in the description before the end of the weekend. So Jason, I appreciate you so much. Can't wait to get to hang out with you. Hopefully next time it won't be so eventful. Well, hopefully it will be, but different kind of eventful.
Yeah, different kind of eventful. And yes, the books are all available on Amazon. This one, Metroplex Monsters, which is a little bit more fun. It was designed to be more fun. You can get Amazon, you get it on barnesandnoble.com. If you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you can actually find them at Barnes & Noble. But the rest of my books are all on Amazon. Amazon seems to have one book associated with me that I have no idea where it is or what it is or where it came from. So if you see one that just seems really weird, that one's not mine. The other really weird things are mine. Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming up. We appreciate it, and look forward to doing this again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much. Everybody, make sure that you stick around for the next show. We'll be on in just a few minutes, and we're going to have Jesse and Cindy up. So they're going to be talking about some of their paranormal experiences. They were going to do a live investigation, but they got hit by storms tonight. So we're just be talking experiences. So, all right, guys, we will see you here in just a few minutes.
Y'all have fun.
Thank you, Jason. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.